This message comes from Greenlight. Ready to start talking to your kids about financial literacy? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app that teaches kids and teens how to earn, save, spend wisely, and invest with your guardrails in place. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Join millions of parents and kids building healthy financial habits together on Greenlight. Get started risk-free at greenlight.com/Wondery.
Bombas makes the most comfortable socks, underwear, and T-shirts.
Warning, Bombas are so absurdly comfortable you may throw out all your other clothes.
Sorry, do we legally have to say that?
No, this is just how I talk, and I really love my Bombas.
They do feel that good. And they do good, too. One item purchased equals one item donated.
To feel good and do good, go to bombas.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY for 20% off your first purchase. That's BOMBAS.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY at checkout.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
This is Alice and Brett from The Prosecutors, and we are excited to announce our new show, The Prosecutors Legal Briefs. Each week, we'll bring our experience as prosecutors to true crime in the news. Whether it's breaking developments in a case, the intricacies of sentencing, or analysis of what's really going on in cases like the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp defamation trial, we'll have you covered.
So if you're looking for the latest in true crime from a different point of view, The Prosecutors Legal Briefs is the show for you. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. The Prosecutors is brought to you by Progressive. Progressive helps you compare direct auto rates from a variety of companies so you can find a great one, even if it's not with them. Quote today at Progressive.com to find a rate that works with your budget. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations.
Hello, everyone. This is Mike.
And this is Gibby.
And we're the hosts of the True Crime All the Time Unsolved podcast. If you haven't already, we'd love to invite you to come check us out. Starting in January of 2017, we've amassed over 230 episodes of some of the most intriguing unsolved cases in true crime history. We cover some of the very big unsolved cases, but we also like to cover some of the lesser known cases, some that you may have never heard of. We dive into the details. We talk about the victims, their life, the circumstances around their disappearance or murder, and we cover the potential suspects and persons of interest. We try to give you all the known facts you need to satisfy your amateur detective. We like to think that we don't take ourselves all that seriously, but we take true crime very seriously. You can listen to True Crime All the Time Unsolved now on Podcast One, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
You know you want to.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are The Prosecutors. Today on The Prosecutors, we continue our look at the Casey Anthony case. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my wicked cool co-host, Alice.
Wicked cool. Thank you.
Wicked cool.
Did you know that term? I could be wrong about this, but wicked, at least in the United States, originated like in Maine?
Is that right? I mean, I knew it was big in Boston, but I didn't know that it came from Maine.
I might be making this up. Well, that would make sense. It, comes down from Maine to Boston and then finally, to the rest of the United States. But obviously, I don't think it originated in Maine originally.
Do you know why people in Maine like to call people wicked?
No.
I mean, that seems like not a nice thing to say about somebody, really. Usually. I mean, it's become a nice thing, but...
Exactly. I have no idea. I literally heard about this weekend, so I don't think I've discussed it with you. It's just funny that you would call me that.
Oh, yeah. Little synchronicity there. Just more proof that we all are living in a simulation. But that's okay. I know I'm real. I don't know about the rest of you. Just me.
Same.
It's my world. I'm living in it. Oh, man. Well, guys, we are back to talk more about Casey Anthony. It only took us 2 episodes, but we got through the timeline. And now we're going to be diving into this case. As we said on the last episode, the big question here, and I think the thing that we're really going to be focusing on the whole time, yes, the question of, is Casey Anthony guilty? But also, maybe even the bigger question of, why was she not found guilty by the jury? And the first thing we're going to talk about today is, I think, the first jumping off point for that, and is a place where a lot of people spend a lot of time, and that's on the charges that Casey Anthony faced for the disappearance and ultimate death of her daughter. So let's talk about the charges so that we can discuss the rest of the case, and you guys can have these in the back of your mind, what the prosecution had to prove to show that Casey Anthony was guilty of murder. So Casey faced a number of charges. The most serious charge, of course, was first-degree murder. In addition to that, she faced aggravated child abuse, aggravated manslaughter of a child, and 4 counts of providing false information to law enforcement. So we will start with first-degree murder. That is Florida Statute 782.041A1 for anybody who wants to look it up. It is the unlawful killing of a human being when perpetrated from a premeditated design to effect the death of the person killed or any human being. And first-degree murder is the most serious form of murder. It's the most serious crime you can commit. And it really does come down to this question of premeditation. We've talked about this before, but for those of you who maybe are just now joining us on the show, premeditation, according to the law in Florida, requires specific intent to commit the act, which means you have to decide, I am going to kill this person. So if you're going to prove that someone committed first-degree murder, you must first prove that they made that conscious decision to kill them at some point before they committed the act. Now, you think of premeditation, you may think of weeks-long planning. It doesn't actually take that. It really only takes a moment. If you have, the gun in your hand pointed at somebody, and right before you pull the trigger, you think to yourself, I am going to kill this person, that is sufficient for premeditation. It's really just something that takes it beyond an act of passion, an act of rage, a spontaneous decision, something that gives it that added level of malice where you decide consciously to take a life. We as society have decided that is the most serious crime you can commit, and she was charged, Casey Anthony was charged with this incredibly serious crime of deciding that she was going to murder her daughter, Caylee Anthony, and then carrying out that crime.
And in addition, it is first-degree murder to kill someone while committing aggravated child abuse. Casey was also charged with this. So there were 2 paths for the jury to find her guilty of first-degree murder. Aggravated child abuse is found in Florida Statute 827.03, and it occurs when a person, 1, commits aggravated battery on a child, 2, willfully tortures, maliciously punishes, or willfully and unlawfully cages a child, or 3, knowingly or willfully abuses a child and in so doing causes great bodily harm, permanent disability, or permanent disfigurement to the child. Now, aggravated manslaughter of a child is found in Florida Statute 782.07, and that's the killing of a human being by the act, procurement, or culpable negligence of another without lawful justification. So the fact that a child died makes it aggravated manslaughter and moves the punishment from a maximum of 15 years to 30 years.
So you've got these two murder paths, I guess we'll call it. First degree murder, where it's either a conscious decision to kill a person, or also in Florida, first degree murder, if it is a child who dies, if it's the result of this sort of aggravated child abuse. So not just normal child abuse, but things like torture or just extreme forms of punishment. Florida and some other states have decided that if you are doing that to a child and the child dies, that is still going to be first degree murder, even though it doesn't have the premeditation that you normally have in a first degree murder count. And then Alice pointed to aggravated manslaughter. So this is sort of a lesser charge. It's not first degree murder. It's a charge where you kill someone through this through this culpable negligence. And because it's a child, you're looking at 30 years here. For the first degree murder, it's life without parole or the death penalty in Florida. And in fact, the prosecution had decided to seek the death penalty in the case against Casey Anthony. But look, they're giving the jury an out. If they don't want to find her guilty of first degree murder, they can find her guilty of this aggravated manslaughter. Now, you have this culpable negligence. What exactly is that? So it's defined in Florida as showing reckless disregard for human life or for the safety of persons exposed to its dangerous effects, or which shows wantonness or recklessness, or an indifference to the rights of others as is equivalent to an intentional violation of such rights. Now, we've talked about this kind of murder action before, this reckless disregard for human life. The thing that I find interesting about this is actually a little bit higher threshold than you would normally see in a manslaughter charge. Normally you have first degree murder, which we talked about, then you have second degree murder, and that is usually reckless disregard for human life. So an action which is just so reckless and dangerous that in taking it, you know that you could kill someone, and we're going to hold you to a higher standard. Manslaughter, negligent manslaughter, you guys probably remember the Redonda Vaught case. Remember what she was facing. It was a negligence charge. No one thought, well, I say no one thought, the prosecution did technically charge her with this reckless homicide, but put that aside, she wasn't convicted of that. What she was convicted of was murder as a result of her own negligence. So she was negligent in a serious way. It resulted in someone's death. No one thought it was a conscious decision on her part, but nevertheless, we are going to hold her accountable. Now, what is interesting, I looked through the Florida statutes, and I would be interested to hear from any of you who are lawyers in Florida. I could not find a homicide charge in Florida that just results from common negligence. So the kind of charge that Redonda Vaught was convicted of, I couldn't actually find it in Florida. I'm not sure that there would be a charge equivalent to that in Florida. And even child abuse itself requires culpable negligence. So that same sort of reckless disregard type thing. So in other words, if, say, Caylee died in an accident when she slipped out of the home and drowned in the family pool while Casey wasn't watching, that I don't know that there is a manslaughter charge that covers that. And I think that actually becomes a pretty important fact in this case. As most of you know, that is exactly the defense that is exactly the argument that the defense is going to make. They are going to say that Caylee's death was the result of an accident, that essentially what happened is Caylee drowned in the pool, and everything else you see is a cover-up of that fact. And I wonder if part of the reason that this happened was that they recognized this is not really covered by any of the statutes, so we're going to go for that. Now, here's an interesting thing about the charges. What we read to you is not actually the end of it. In addition to this, if you look at the jury instructions in this case, the jury was instructed on all lesser included offenses for murder. We've talked about this before. Sometimes the lesser included offenses You have the charged offenses, and then you have lesser included offenses, which will be the lower sort of tiers of murder. So she's charged with 2 versions of murder here. But really, every form of homicide in Florida, the jury was given the option of convicting her on those. If you look at the jury instructions, which we can put online, you'll see that. Now, here's what's crazy about that. My whole life, or at least since this happened, and so for the last 10 years, I have been under the impression that one of the mistakes the prosecution made in this case was they overcharged it. You will hear people say that again and again and again. I was listening to the Bob Ruff show. I listen to Bob all the time. He did an episode on Casey Anthony, and our good friend Jim Clemente of the CBS documentary on John Benet Ramsey was on his show, and Clemente was in the FBI at the time and apparently actually assisted in the investigation. And he said again and again and again on Bob's show that the big mistake the prosecution made was they only charged first-degree murder, and they didn't give the jury any other option. And that he went to the prosecutor and he said, if you do this, this is a huge mistake. They're never going to convict her on this. You're making a huge mistake. But he decided to do it anyway. And I listened to this podcast and I thought, that is not right. Because when I listened to it, I had already done this part of the outline for our case. So I knew the charges and I was like, did I get this wrong? And so I went back and I listened to the jury verdict. And sure enough, in the jury verdict, they go through the fact that they found her not guilty of all these different charges. I looked at the jury charge and it has all these lesser included offenses. And I read something by a juror who said he now regrets the fact that they acquitted her of everything. And he wishes that he had pushed more for one of the lower charges. And so I have no idea where that comes from. I don't know if I'm just losing my mind and missing something or what, or if this is just misinformation that's out there, because it's something that I have believed since I heard about this case the first time.
No, Brett, I looked at it as well, and you're right. I've heard that for so long before I ever looked into this case. It was they overcharged the case, so she got off because it was essentially a technicality. They couldn't prove the highest charges that they brought, and they brought such high charges because it was such an egregious case that gripped the nation. That's what I had heard over and over. But when I looked, like you did, I couldn't find where that would be the case.
Yeah, and it seems like such a stark thing to get wrong that I almost feel like I must be missing something. So if there's somebody out there who is sort of a self-appointed expert on this case, I would love to hear if we are missing something, if there is something that we're just not seeing here, because everything that I have looked at indicates to me that she was charged with every possible charge she could have had, and she was acquitted of all of them. So that is my charge to you, is to explain to me why it is part of the lore of this case that overcharging was at the heart of her being acquitted, because I'm just not seeing it. But I've heard it so much, I just feel like it has to be true. So it's like kind of a strange place to be. I'm basically convinced that I'm wrong about this, but I've looked at so many different things that confirm that indeed she was charged with everything she could have been charged with. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure what to say about that. And I hate to harp on this. I feel like I'm harping on this a little bit, but it's just such a part of this that I don't get it, I guess is what I'm saying. I mean, I've got the jury instructions in front of me right now, and it's got murder in the first degree, includes the lesser crimes of murder in the second degree, manslaughter, and third degree felony murder, all of which are unlawful. If you find Caylee Marie Anthony was killed by Casey Marie Anthony, you will then consider the circumstances surrounding the killing and deciding if the killing was murder in the first degree, or was murder in the second degree, or manslaughter, or third-degree felony murder, where the killing was excusable or resulted from justifiable use of deadly force. I mean, these are pretty standard, jury instructions. And then it goes through and basically, I instruct you on the circumstances that must be proved before Casey Marie Anthony may be found guilty of murder in the first degree, aggravated child abuse, aggravated manslaughter of a child, 4 counts of providing false information to a law enforcement officer, or any lesser included crime. So like I said, we will put these online and you can read. I mean, it's interesting if you're just interested in what the elements are of every form of murder in the state of Florida, because they're all in there. So I don't know where that comes from, but it's wrong. I'm just here to tell you it's wrong. She wasn't overcharged, and that is not what led to her being acquitted.
I agree. No, it's a very, like you said, it's a very standard jury form, and when you have all the lesser included charges, you don't have to have the top line item. It's all included within there. So again, Brett, maybe you and I are missing something, but I don't think so. And this is kind of what happens in a lot of these famous cases: is one thing is said on some podcast or by some newscaster, and then it's just repeated over and over without anyone actually checking into whether it was true or not. That's why we always tell you guys to go to the primary sources. And again, this is for you to see on our website, and you should go look at it.
And I just want to apologize because I have said this before. I have said this before on Get Vocals and our show, that my understanding of the reason that Casey Anthony was not convicted was because she was overcharged. And so I am sorry. I was wrong about that, apparently. But in any event, we'll move on. But if we are wrong about being wrong, I would love for someone to tell us, actually, no, you're right all along. Alice, if there are two things I love, it's video games and true crime, and that's why I love June's Journey, which brings the two together. You play as June Parker, an amateur detective on a quest to solve the murder of her sister and uncover her family's many secrets. You'll need to find objects devilishly hidden in intricate scenes full of little details before the timer runs out. A variety of game modes and puzzles await. I really enjoy this game. If you play, look for me, Prosecutors Brett. I'm at the top of basically every scoreboard. Or join my detective guild, the Prosecutors Fans. We already have one member, and I'm looking forward to having some more.
June's Journey has tons of fun and unique features. You can chat and play with other players, so come find us. You'll even get the chance to play in a detective league to put your skills to the test. So find your inner detective. Download June's Journey today. It's available on Android and iOS mobile devices, as well as on PC through Facebook Games.
The Prosecutors is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Let's face it, sometimes multitasking can be overwhelming. Like when your favorite podcast is playing and the person next to you is talking and your car fan is blasting, all while you're trying to find the perfect parking spot. But then again, sometimes multitasking is easy, like quoting with Progressive Insurance. They do the hard work of comparing rates so you can find a great rate that works for you, even if it's not with them. Give their nifty comparison tool a try, and you might just find the rate and coverage you deserve is easy.
All you need to do is visit Progressive's website to get a quote with all the coverages you want, like comprehensive and collision coverage or personal injury protection. Then you'll see Progressive's direct rate, and their tool will provide options from other companies all lined up and ready to compare, so it's simple to choose the rate and coverages you like. Press play on comparing auto rates. Quote at Progressive.com to join the over 27 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
Alice, I was sick recently, and I was so glad that I had Tivic Clear Up. It was one of the few things that gave me relief from sinus pain and congestion. And if you're like me, and you're suffering from sinus pain, congestion, heaviness in the face and eyes, headaches, runny nose, or watery eyes, over-the-counter and prescription drugs with side effects and messy sprays are a hard way to live for many people suffering from these conditions. I'm here to tell you about a revolutionary product that will change your life forever. Introducing Tivic Clear Up, an easy-to-use, FDA-approved medical device that fits in the palm of your hand.
Brett, it's created by doctors and neuroscientists. Tivic Clear Up stops suffering by using bioelectronic technology to reduce sinus pain and congestion. Simply glide Tivic Clear Up on areas of your face where you are experiencing sinus pain. Try Tivic Clear Up today with a 60-day risk-free trial. Go to TivicHealth.com. That's TIVIC health.com and enter promo code Prosecutors22 to receive $20 off plus free shipping on your Clear Up device. Tivic Clear Up works when nothing else can.
Talking about jury charge, obviously, who was on the jury was important. And this was one of those cases where, unless you went to the moon, you weren't going to find anybody who hadn't heard about this case. And probably the astronauts there would have heard about it. So there was a concern that the jury pool was so tainted in Orlando that they just could not find a good jury. So what they ended up doing is they selected the jury from St. Petersburg and Clearwater and the surrounding areas instead of Orlando. Now that's about an hour and a half away. This is one of those weird things, sort of an anachronistic thing. There probably was a time where a murder like this would taint the jury pool in Orlando, but not the jury pool an hour and a half away. But they got CNN and Fox News in St. Petersburg too. So they knew everything about this case there too. So I don't know that it was really that valuable. It was a situation where they didn't even move the trial. They just moved the jury pool. So they pulled these people out. They brought them to Orlando and had them try the case there. And I don't know. I think a lot of these big trials are kind of ruined by jury selection. I get it. I think publicity is way overstated as corrupting jurors. I really do. I think most jurors can put aside what they've heard in the media and listen to what is happening in the courtroom. And I think by finding people who have not listened, look, if you don't know anything about the Casey Anthony case, you probably shouldn't be a juror because there's something wrong with you. And right then, if you're in the middle of it, if you're an hour and a half away in Florida and you've never heard of Casey Anthony, I don't know what you do or how you are connected to society or what your sort of interaction is with the world. But to me, that's a red flag. But that's who they were looking for, with those people who somehow managed to live their lives without ever hearing anything about Casey Anthony. And that is the jury pool that they ended up drawing from.
I don't know, Brett. I'll stand up for all the people who maybe didn't hear about it as someone who typically lives under a rock. But I hear what you're saying. And, this is a very interesting thing where you move the jury because of a potential tainted pool. I think it worked better back in the day, like of our founding fathers, rather than today when we have social media and kind of 24 hours news around the clock that is ubiquitous. And, one town's tragedy is blasted across the entire nation pretty quickly, if not by the news outlets, then through social media. And so nowadays, I'm not exactly sure if it serves the purpose that it was intended, which is to draw a pool of people who don't know about the case. Or you can imagine that you typically do that in a situation where, say, a very influential family is affected either as, they're part of the defense or the victims, and you're afraid that that tight-knit small community can't put their personal feelings aside because they know the family, or that family is so influential in their community that they cannot be objective jurors. But I just don't think that is really the reason we use a different jury pool these days. So I don't know if any of you have been called to another jurisdiction because of this particular phenomenon, and whether you in fact didn't know anything about the case. You should let us know. But like I said, when we've tried to kind of pull jurors from different sections of our jurisdiction, it doesn't really create any difference, to be honest, in terms of whether they've heard about a very hot case.
And I think that's a great point you make about small town with an influential family. That makes a lot of sense. I can see that. Maybe everybody works at the plant that's owned by the family, something like that. That I can get, because that you can see how that would be a biased jury pool. But just having heard about it or read about it or seen something on the TV, anybody who's ever been in a trial, anybody who's ever sat through one, anybody who's ever served on a jury knows how different what you're seeing in the jury is from what you've heard on television. And I think that this judge in particular, who was a good judge and did a really good job managing this, if you watch any of the trial, you can see that he really did a good job with some big personalities, particularly on the defense side. I think they could have cured the jury pool of any taint from having heard about it without resorting to what I think is an extreme thing to go outside the community, number one, and number two, to basically look for people who had no idea that anything was going on. And granted, as we said last time, the prosecution bears some of the blame for this because they were just so excited about putting out all the evidence they were going to use in the case into the media after she had already been charged, which was a huge mistake. But nevertheless, I think it would have been better if they had not done it this way.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Brett, just because you've heard about a case in general does not automatically disqualify you for serving on the jury. Basically, there's almost nothing that can automatically disqualify you for being on a jury except for a very limited set of factors. And for the most part, the next step, if you do answer yes to any of these questions, is to see if you can be cured. And to be cured just means to ask if you can put aside whatever preconceived notions or whatever you read in the media and be fair and unbiased and to follow the judge's instructions. Most people, this is hard because most people will say yes, even if you, as the lawyer doing the voir dire, can read body language and know there's no way they can put those, very strongly held opinions aside. But based on the law, if they say the right words, they can be cured. And vice versa. We see people trying to get out of jury duty saying there's no way I can be fair and impartial judge. And, saying that to some ridiculous question.
And look, I think that's one of the reasons you have strikes. When we talk about strikes, preemptory strikes, you have a certain number of strikes. You can strike somebody for no reason at all. You don't like the way they answered a question. They gave you a weird vibe. As long as you're not doing it for a discriminatory reason, you can strike them for any purpose. And some people don't like those. They don't like preemptory strikes because they're worried about the discriminatory purpose, but they serve a really important purpose, which is something like that, where somebody has told you, I know everything about this. I've totally made up my mind. The judge says, well, can you put that aside? They say yes. You think they are totally full of it. Well, you have a strike. You can get rid of them. So That's another thing you can do to try and fix the jury pool.
We'll probably do on our other podcasts, the prosecutor's legal briefs, a whole thing on how to pick a jury and voir dire. Not how to pick a jury, because it is not a science. It is an art form, really, and there's no right answer until the very end, and you will almost always get it wrong. But the voir dire system is very, very interesting. So we'll probably do an episode on that at some point if there's interest in how you pick a jury. But for these purposes, just know that the jury was selected not from Casey Anthony's own hometown, but but a town about an hour and a half away. Now let's talk about the players in this case. If you know anything about this case, you've probably heard of all these people, but let's kind of lay it out for you so you know who the major players are. Let's talk about George Anthony. George Anthony, of course, is Casey's father. He was a retired police officer. Around the time that Casey had Caylee, things were falling apart for George. He'd lost a good-paying job and he was accumulating gambling debts. And there was talk of divorce. Although the birth of Caylee brought the family back together for a while, by the time of Caylee's death, talk of divorce had apparently begun again.
And this is sort of unclear. You can do a lot of research in this case. You can read a lot of things. You can watch a lot of stuff and still have no idea what was going on with this family when Caylee disappeared, which I think is telling and problematic. I think there was a lot going on with this family around that time, and I think it played a role in what happened. If I had a criticism for the prosecution's case, having watched a lot of the trial and read a lot of the transcripts, it's that they did a poor job, in my opinion, of explaining to the jury why then. And what I mean by that is, why kill Caylee then? Of all the times, why was it that Casey decided that was the day? I mean, if you're going to say somebody killed someone with premeditation, it doesn't have to be a big plan, but at some point you have to decide to do it. And I think it's a legitimate question. You don't have to show why. There's no reason to prove motive. That is not a requirement for a conviction as far as the elements of the offense go. But in the real world, with real people, when you're asking to send somebody to prison for a long time, they want to know why they did it. And I think there just wasn't really a lot of that. I think if you look at this, it seems like the family was having a lot of problems, kind of falling apart. There was a lot of stress. And as we're going to see as we go on, I think a lot of that stress centered around the apparent sort of disintegration of this family and what was going to happen to Caylee and where she was going to end up. George and Cindy Anthony, we're going to talk about Cindy in a second, they made a decision at some point. At some point, they made a decision that they were going to stick by Casey. And because they were going to stick by Casey, even though you can watch interviews with them, there's a great documentary that we'll link to where they give an interview. They don't really tell you much. And they certainly don't answer the questions that you want to know. But the irritating thing is if you watch them testify, they don't talk about it then either. And the prosecution really didn't make any effort to dig into what was going on with that family around the time that all this happened. And I don't know if that was because they were spooked by some of the defense tactics that we're going to talk about, or if they didn't want to seem like they were putting George and Cindy on the spot, or if they didn't want the jury to think they were blaming them and sort of blaming the victims in a way for what happened to Caylee. But to me, this was a huge part. What's going on there? What was going on with George and Cindy? There was talk that Cindy was going to move out of the house and was going to buy her own house. There was talk that Cindy was going to stay in the house. George was going to be the one moving out. And that because of that, Casey wasn't going to be able to stay in the home anymore, that Cindy was going to change that. She didn't want Casey living there anymore, which obviously would have been a stressor for Casey, who, oh, by the way, didn't have a job, even though she'd been telling her parents she was working at Universal Studios. That's an interesting thing. I would like to know more about that, but it's really hard to figure out exactly what's going on.
And Brett, part of the difficulty here is that the prosecution, if they put forth something like that, they better be pretty sure about the family dynamics. And as we'll see, the Anthony family doesn't talk, and it's not clear what's going on. And if they were to put forth a story about the family life that was slightly askew, the defense could probably just do enough to rebut it and maybe make the prosecution look like they knew nothing, even if they didn't tell the full story. So I wonder if the prosecution was kind of hamstrung as well because they weren't sure what exactly the story was, and it would be so easy for the defense to just call them out on the small inaccuracy and make them look like they actually are stumbling about and don't know what's going on. So I get that the prosecution's in a tough position, and part of the tough position is that it's not a clear story from the Anthonys themselves. But I agree with you, it's incredibly important here. And I wonder if the prosecution was somehow also trying to not distract the jury because there had been so many sensational articles in the papers and in the news about Caylee Anthony that they wanted them to focus on the person who was at trial, which is Casey. We face this a lot too, Brett, where we try to kind of streamline our story and we end up cutting out parts of the story that are very important, and we try to make judgment calls, but sometimes that judgment in hindsight was an error, that they should have told more of the story to fully understand the woman who was in trial.
And look, I'll just go ahead and put my cards on the table on this. You all know Casey Anthony was acquitted. I think one of the big reasons she was acquitted was because of her parents. I think because of the way her parents handled this case, handled the situation, handled the prosecution, I think it is a big factor in her being acquitted. And you can see that with Cindy. Alice is 100% right. Criticizing the prosecution here for not teasing this out more, but they're kind of stuck with the witnesses they have, and they're pretty bad witnesses. Cindy's a great example. Now, Cindy, she's Casey's mother. She's also a registered nurse. She's somebody who's been around dead bodies before. She knows what a dead body smells like. She'll say that later on. And initially, when Cindy calls the police, she kicks off a lot of this. You've all heard this part of the 911 call. We're going to play it later on, where she says it smells like a dead body's been in the damn car. And she says it with passion. And that is a huge factor in this case. And you would expect she knows exactly what she's talking about. But by the time she's being interviewed by the police, which isn't much later, she is completely repudiating that. She's now saying she doesn't know if she smelled that body. It was probably just rotting pizza in a trash bag in the car. And that was just a preview. That interview, that initial interview she gives with police, it's recorded. It's incredibly frustrating to watch it. Is a preview of Cindy's approach from that point forward. The only time, in my opinion, that Cindy Anthony has been completely honest is in that 911 call, when she was emotional and her guard was down and she wasn't trying to save her daughter. That is the only time that she's been completely honest, and I think she told us what she really smelled that day. But from that point forward, she went into protect Casey mode. And look, this is something that happens. Go back to John Bonet Ramsey. What doesn't happen is people decide to protect one of their children by garroting their daughter and sexually assaulting her. That doesn't happen. But what does happen is parents deciding at some point they are going to protect their child. Even in a case like this, where it appears their child has killed their granddaughter, they still have to make a decision. Are we going to put her in jail, or are we going to try and save what's left? And you see this a lot. And I think it's what you're seeing here. I think at some point Cindy decided they may convict her, but they're not going to convict her with my help. I'm not going to say I smelled a dead body in that car. I am going to change my story, and sure enough, she does.
And that you may be thinking, well, why did she tell the truth when she called 911 but not later? And here's the thing. When she called 911, she was overcome with emotion and she did not know that Caylee was dead. She strongly suspected it, but she did not know if police help could maybe find and save Caylee or what have you. And so she was still in the position of mother and grandmother at the time of the 911 call. By the time she is being interviewed by police, she did not have Caylee to save anymore. Maybe she would have made a different decision if Caylee were alive, but she knew that the only one left to save was Casey, and she decided to do so. I've actually never been in a situation where I was able to successfully get a parent to testify against their child. This is whether they are co-defendants in a case or the parent has nothing to do with anything. They didn't even know that, their child was using their name to launder a great deal of money for their drug deals. It doesn't matter. That bond is just incredibly strong. I get it. I would do just about anything for my kids. And we see that in the court of law. So if I can avoid it at any cost, I try not to have to call a close family member who doesn't have a privilege. Siblings and parents, mostly the parents, more so than siblings, because siblings, you get into different dynamics as to how close they are. But parents will almost always lie for their kids on the stand. And for that reason, I try very hard not to call parents in as testimony against their own child.
And you'd be surprised how many times that law enforcement is like, well, the mother knows all about it. Oh, well, great. That's not going to be helpful because guess what? Mama might have told you something. She's not going to get on the stand and testify against her kid. That's not going to happen. And guess who's not going to like that? The jury. So Alice is right. There's no privilege. You have a spousal privilege not to have to testify against your spouse. There's no privilege for parents, but there might as well be because they're not usually very willing witnesses.
Guys, let's talk about something that affects all of us, and that's cringing at the pump because gas prices are rising, and also everything is more expensive because inflation is hitting us all where it hurts, and it really hurts. That's why I started using Upside. Upside is an incredible app for anyone who buys gas, groceries, or dines out. With every purchase, I'm earning cash back thanks to Upside. To get started, download the free Upside app in the App Store or Google Play. Use our promo code PROSECUTE and get $5 or more cash back on your first purchase of $10 or more. Next, claim an offer for whatever you're buying on Upside. Check in at the business, pay as usual with a credit card, and get paid.
Alice, if this sounds too good to be true, it's because Upside really is awesome. We're not talking a couple cents here or there. The last time I used Upside, I got 40 cents off a gallon of gas. Each gallon I bought. That is real money that makes a real difference. And you can cash out anytime to your bank account, PayPal, or an e-gift card for Amazon and other brands. Upside users are earning more than $1 million every week. That's probably why they have a 4.8 star rating on the App Store. Download the free Upside app and use promo code PROSECUTE to get $5 or more cash back on your first purchase of $10 or more. That's $5 or more cash back on your first purchase of $10 or more using promo code PROSECUTE. Alice, whether you're spending long, sunny days by the pool or exploring new places on vacation, there is a universal urge to make the most out of summer. The Faraday family lives for this time of year, and their brand captures that feeling of summer and adventure in their collection of high-quality clothing that's incredibly soft and comfortable. Always sustainably minded and meant to be worn from surf to city. Faraday is a family-run brand making high-quality, timeless clothing with modern design and functionality. If you went to CrimeCon and you saw me, I was wearing Faraday. It is something you can wear in any situation, whether you need to dress up or whether you just want to relax.
Brett, my go-to dress this summer is the Caylee dress because it's thoughtfully crafted with a classic style. I can dress it up or down, wear it to a picnic, to church, even to work on casual Fridays. It's a brand that you will wear over and over again. Right now, Faraday is giving all of you 20% off. Let me say that again, 20% off. Head to FaradayBrand.com/TP and use code TP at checkout to get this deal. That's code TP at Faraday, FAHERTY brand.com/TP for 20% off. FaradayBrand.com/TP. Brett, as work has been heating up with court dates being set and being on the go a lot more, I've been on so many more conference calls, and I'm so glad that I have my Raycon wireless earbuds to talk on. Raycon's everyday earbuds look, feel, and sound better than ever with optimized gel tips for the perfect in-ear fit. These earbuds are so comfortable, and they will not budge. Trust me, I go running with these Raycon wireless earbuds. I walk, I play with my kids, and they don't budge.
Alice, with two kids running around, it can be pretty loud in the house, and that's one reason I love Raycon's noise isolation. If I want to block everything out, I can, but if I need to hear what's going on, it also has an awareness mode, which lets in some of that outside noise that you might need to hear, and the earbud tap functions allow you to adjust the volume, answer a call, do whatever you need with the simple touch of a button. It is no wonder that Raycon's everyday earbuds have over 50,000 five-star reviews. So go to buyraycon.com/prosecutors today to get 15% off your Raycon order. That's buyraycon.com/prosecutors to score 15% off. buyraycon.com/prosecutors.
Brett, I know we've talked about the Jordan Harbinger show before, and I can't wait to talk about it again because this is a podcast all of you definitely need to check out. This show covers a huge range of topics through weekly interviews with heavy-hitting guests, and there are a ton of episodes you'll find interesting since you like our show. For example, Jordan Harbinger has a true crime starter pack. You can listen to his interviews with Frank Abagnale, who is the former con artist that was part of the movie and book Catch Me If You Can, and he also talks to Freeway Rick Ross about his life in the crack lane and many more episodes just like that. There's an episode for everyone, no matter what you're into.
Alice, we really enjoy this show, and we think that all our listeners will as well. Search for The Jordan Harbinger Show. That's HARB as in boy, IN as in Nancy, GER on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. That's The Jordan Harbinger Show.
Now let's talk about Zenaida or Zanny Fernandez-Gonzalez. So remember Zanny the nanny that Casey originally said that she was the one who Caylee was with or had potentially kidnapped Caylee? There really was a Zenaida Fernandez-Gonzalez, and she actually filed a suit against Casey after she lost her job due to her connection to the case. Apparently, Casey had never met Zenaida, though she had been to the same apartment complex as the one Anthony took police to that day that they came to see her. Her lawsuit would eventually be dismissed as she could not show that Casey actually intended to cause her harm, as opposed to just throw out a name that happened to hit. Casey told her mother that she'd met Zenaida through a man she dated, Jeffrey Hopkins. Zenaida was his ex-girlfriend. Except she wasn't. Hopkins would testify at trial that he'd attended middle school with Anthony, but otherwise had lost touch with her, and he'd never dated Casey or Zenaida. And this goes along with kind of how Casey tells these huge fantastical lies, both big and small. And so you can see how confusing this is. Zanny the nanny was a huge part of her story when the hunt was on to find Caylee. But then she kind of spins these stories as to how she met Zanny the nanny, and Zanny the nanny was not real whatsoever, but she was based off of a real person. But even how she met that real person is twisted up in lies. There's just so many layers. There's so many layers of confusion.
Casey Anthony and her lies is something I could talk about for forever. It is the most fascinating thing in all of true crime. I seriously believe that. I wish I was a psychologist or a psych major or something just to be able to understand. I mean, Casey should be studied by somebody. She is a fabulist of the nth degree. I mean, of the highest order. She is amazing. It is crazy to me that she just made up this name. I guess she just made up this name, or she had seen it. It's like, probably she'd seen it somewhere and it just kind of stuck in her mind. I mean, you got this Hopkins guy. So she pulls a name of someone from middle school that she hadn't talked to in 10, 15 years. That was just an acquaintance. She pulls that name out as somebody she had dated that introduced her to this Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez person. And it's just like Alice said, the layers of lies here are just impressive. I mean, it's an impressive thing that she did this. And it's kind of funny. I feel bad for the actual Zenaida who sued Casey. And it's like, well, you can't even prove that she meant to do it because it's like she just pulled this name out of thin air. And you just happen to be the one that she hit. And what a name, Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez. It makes you feel like she had to have seen that name somewhere, and that's why she picked it. But, wow.
I mean, it's like a pinball machine of lies, right? They don't even flow together. It's just like lie, 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 lie for the sake of lying. Not even necessarily with some grand plan. If she really wanted to lead, I mean, this was pretty smart because this was a real person, so they actually had someone to focus on. But man, this lie went on for a long time because the first time Zanny was brought up was not when the police came to look for Caylee. She had been talking about Zanny for some time with her parents.
And can we just say how much denial her parents were in? And just back to the parents. So your daughter, who lives with you on and off with her granddaughter, is telling you about this nanny for a very long time that you have never met. Somehow you've never met this woman. Then you don't see your granddaughter for 30-something days, and your daughter keeps telling you, oh, she's with this nanny that you've never met. It would be one thing if it was a former nanny, and Casey had fired her 3 months ago, or she'd left because she wasn't paying her, something like that. But the fact that she just made this woman up out of whole cloth, and her parents just believed she was real and she existed. It's crazy. It's just wild.
And remember how this is why the parents are very interesting characters here, because remember what her parents have testified to publicly is that Caylee would stay with Zanny specifically, not just some babysitter, for days on end. But that can't possibly be true because there was no Zanny. And so was it that they thought Caylee was staying with Zanny, or they're helping tell the lie after the fact that Caylee had stayed with other people named Zanny for some time? I don't know. My brain is hurting trying to make sense of all the lies.
Yeah, it's something. I mean, it is something. And it's just one of those almost inexplicable things. You'll never know. Just like you'll never know who Caylee Anthony's father was, you'll never know where Casey Anthony got Zenaida from because she just made her up, I guess. So let's talk about Roy Kronk. We mentioned him earlier. He is the gentleman who was constantly calling the police saying, you should really come out here to the forest and, you know, there's something out there. And I think it's a body. And the police kept coming out there and didn't find anything. And of course, police looked into Roy Kronk since he'd been the one to find the body. It didn't take them long to rule him out as a suspect. But nevertheless, he would become a focus of Casey Anthony's defense team. It's interesting because the Anthony defense team had a defense that was both focused and completely throw everything against the wall. And Alice and I have talked about making that decision as a defense attorney. When do you tell a story versus when do you throw things against the wall? This defense was very much throw things against the wall. They're going to say that Caylee drowned in the pool and then her father hid the body. Well, that is completely incompatible with the attacks they launched against Roy Kronk. They essentially accused him of murder. And in fact, Kronk's ex-wife would say that when she heard he found the body, her first thought was that he'd killed the little girl. One of his ex-wife's daughters claimed that Kronk would walk in on her when she was changing clothes. These were all things that came out in the media and don't really have much to do with this case, except they're trying to present Kronk as a dangerous person, a person with a predilection for preying on young girls, and stick in the media's mind and ultimately the jury's mind as well that maybe this guy did it, dumped the body there, and kept calling the police. And that's something people do. We've talked about that before. I mean, that is one of the things that leads police to suspects. If you find the body, you're probably going to be a suspect. If you're somebody who's been around the body, been a part of the search, you'll be one of the suspects. Kronk will later sue unsuccessfully for defamation in this case for all the things that were said about him. As far as the police are concerned, and really even when you look at the defense's theory of the case, Roy Kronk pretty clearly didn't have anything to do with this. Now, it's unfortunate that he was unsuccessful in getting the police to look for the body for so long, but I don't think you're going to pin this one on Roy Kronk.
Well, let's talk about the finding of Caylee's body. The defense hit the finding of the body, noting that Kronk had used a stick to pick up the skull of Caylee to see what it was. The defense used this to argue that the crime scene was compromised. This is actually a really typical attack, as we've discussed before. Someone finds bodies, and usually they contaminate the crime scene because they are not law enforcement, and it's impossible to put things exactly back the way you found them if it's already been moved. Worse, though, is how long it took the police to respond to Kronk. Remember, Kronk called the police 3 different times in August to tell them that he saw something weird in the forest where he'd stopped to use the bathroom. But when the police came out, they didn't find anything, partially because it was raining and the police weren't all that interested in spending time out there in bad weather. And in December, Kronk, still curious, went back out to the spot. This time he went further into the woods, and it was at this point that he found Caylee's body.
Obviously, it would have been better if Kronk had not lifted the skull out with a stick, but I think Kronk's in a position where he's called the police out there 3 times. They weren't too happy with him before. If he's going to call them again, he needs to be sure that this is not something else, an animal skeleton, any number of things. He needs to know, is this actually a body? So he does this thing. He shouldn't have done it, but really the blame's on the police, because if the police had done a better job of looking, then they would have found this body a long time before. That could have been a critical thing. August, it's still a couple months after Caylee went missing. Questionable how much forensic information would have been available then, but probably a lot more than by December. And the spot where her body was found is not that far away from the house. The police knew about this case. It was the biggest thing in the country. And certainly the police were really involved in the search. And you would think if somebody said, hey, there's something in the woods, a stone's throw away from the Anthony house, the police might have taken it a little bit more seriously, but they did not. And this is where we ended up. So we mentioned before Universal Studios and the bizarre, amazing, just mind-blowing trip the police and Casey took through Universal Studios when Casey told them that she was working there. And in fact, Casey had told her parents the same thing. This is something that was actually kind of true. She did have a job in Universal, and she had started working there in 2005. But for at least 2 years prior to the murder, she did not work at Universal. But that didn't stop her from telling her parents otherwise. So for 2 years, she faked having a job, which is also mind-blowing, but it's something that people do more often than you would think. It seems like there are a lot of true crime cases where what's amazing to me, and this is an aside, is how often people kill people out of embarrassment. The number of times that people are faking going to school or faking having a job, and then somebody finds out and a murder results is kind of mind-blowing, but it's something people do. I don't really understand it, but clearly Caylee being a liar about everything, it's not surprising that she would continue to lie about having this job. On one occasion, Caylee told her parents that she worked with a woman named Juliette Lewis, who was having a fundraiser for a charity. Cindy and Caylee went to help Lewis with a fundraiser, but after waiting 90 minutes for her to show up, they left in frustration. Of course, Universal Studios had no employee named Juliette Lewis, nor, by the time of the death, did they have an employee named Casey Anthony. But once again, Casey's commitment to the bit is startling. Just the live at the fundraiser and then just going and wasting 90 minutes of your day just so you don't have to admit to your mom that there is no Juliette Lewis is, I don't know, it's remarkable. It's a remarkable thing.
It's beyond remarkable. I mean, like, you know, at the beginning of this series, we talked about how Caylee lied about everything, including the small things that didn't even matter. She did not need to lie about Juliette Lewis and this charity at all. There are so many ways that she could have dropped little tidbits here and there to make it seem like she had a job and she had coworkers and she had friends from work without having to do this kind of big thing. She knew this was going to fail, and she acted frustrated along with Cindy, who was trying to help her out, and they thought they were being stood up. I mean, it almost seems just, I don't even know what the words are. There are a lot of diagnoses, but this seems to be on the far extreme of that diagnosis of whatever it is, of just kind of watching the world that you manipulate around you for the joy of seeing it being manipulated.
And the weird thing about Caylee lying and the way she lies and the number of lies she tells, I think it actually helps her in the end. I think there was a part of the jury that all of her lies almost created reasonable doubt, because everything about Caylee is in doubt. Her entire life is doubt. I don't know. Who knows anything about her? Everything she tells you could be false. And I really think that was part of it for the jury. They just like, I mean, I have no idea. They were just like, I have no idea what's going on here. I certainly can't say for certain she killed somebody. Like, I think that was part of it. And that's so backwards, because ordinarily, if you're a liar and you constantly lie, the jury's not going to believe you when you, through your defense, say you didn't do it. But I think it actually was to her benefit in this case.
Yeah, I think that's right. Because even as I'm laying out her lies, I can't properly lay them out because I'm so confused. And I have no idea who Caylee is. I have no idea, you know, when Zanny, the nanny, entered her story and if it entered before or after she, you know, Caylee went missing, and what her parents knew or did not know. It's all very confusing because she's had this entire life of operating in this web of lies.
Casey's like a black hole, and you have to avoid being sucked into her darkness when you're looking at this case, because you can find yourself. When we were researching this, I found myself spending an inordinate amount of time trying to figure out where she heard the name Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez. It doesn't actually matter, but I had to know. I had to know where this name came from. And people get sucked into who's Caylee's father. You know, there were people who thought it was her brother because Caylee, it's Casey, and her brother's named Lee. So you put Casey and Lee together and you get Caylee. It's not her brother. Like, we know that definitively. But just people, it's so easy with her to get sucked into these black holes and these lies.
And here's why her way of lying is brilliant, is because we get sucked into these black holes. If I have to know, you know, why did she tell this lie? How did she come up with this lie? But it comes so naturally to her that it's of no effort to her. She did not have some grand plan when she used Zanny the nanny's name. She had no grand plan when she took the police to Universal Studios and got waved through by the guard and walked down hallway after hallway. She has no grand plan. She lies as easily as she breathes air. And because of that, if you were to follow any of these lies or try to make sense of them, you get sucked into this black hole because she will outpace you in her lies before you can even figure out the beginnings of the thread that she has begun to pull, where I don't think she has some mastermind plan behind all of it.
And look, I think there was a trigger for what happened to Caylee. I think there was. I think when you look at this case deep enough, you start to see it a little bit. But there didn't have to be. There is, to a certain extent, it is a fallacy to try and figure out what Casey was thinking, because I think she killed in the same way that she lies. I think it was one of those things where in the moment it was convenient for her, and so she did it. And a lot of people have a lot of trouble with that because Casey's a mother and she loves her daughter, and everybody says she might not have been a great person, but she loved her daughter. So how could she have killed her daughter? And the defense focused on that a lot, and they put up on a lot of witnesses who said things like that. But I think it's like the lies. I think when she needs to do something to serve her purposes, she will do it, whatever it is, no matter how crazy it may be, no matter how self-destructive it might be, and no matter how inevitably it may blow up in her face. And I think that's what you see here.
I think you're exactly right about that, Brett. And the kind of situation that crystallizes what you just said in my mind is her walking through Universal Studios, waving to people who had no idea who she was with the police. She knew it was going to blow up in her face, and it did not matter. And it did not change her demeanor when it did blow up in her face.
Well, we're moving through this case slowly but surely. And we're taking our time with this case. I think you guys can tell. This is a really interesting one. I think a lot of people are interested in this case. And after the 9-part JonBenet Ramsey, everybody told us how much they love it when we do that, and not to worry about it, and not to be concerned that maybe it's going too long. So that's what we're doing. We are indulging ourselves on this case, and we're going to continue to do that as we move through all the things we want to talk about. Next week, we're really going to start getting into what happened around the death of Caylee and the evidence that Casey was involved. And we're also going to talk about how some of that evidence, though it should have been powerful, worked against the prosecution. As I said, on the one hand, we're trying to figure out, did Casey do this? Was it premeditated, or was it something else? But we're also really interested in the psychology of this jury and why they came to the conclusion they did. And I would just say, it is easy to criticize this jury's decision, but I think as you see some of the mistakes the prosecution made, you'll start to understand it. I think on the one hand, we've already seen the black hole that is Casey and how confusing she can be. And I think probably the prosecution underestimated the effect of Casey's willingness to lie through her defense and tell some whoppers. And they thought, this is a straightforward case. We've got all this evidence. This will be simple. And the defense, in really sort of a brilliant way, was able to turn this case into something completely different from what it had been. Really interested to hear what you think so far. Hit us up, prosecutorspod@gmail.com, @prosecutorspod for all our social media. Hello to you who are watching on YouTube. Can't wait to hear the early thoughts of those of you who are listening ad-free on Patreon. Alice mentioned it earlier, but if you're not listening to the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs, I hope you will. I'll say this, if you don't love the deep dives and you're more into the sort of snappy, shorter true crime, Legal Briefs is for you. It's 30-minute episodes. Every now and then we have a 2-parter, but usually it's going to be one episode on a couple different topics. So if you're into that, I hope you will check that out. Well, Alice, before we sign off, do you have anything you want to add?
Brett, we are moving through this case with the amount of diligence that is required of it, because there are so many layers to this. And as you can tell, as we showed in the beginning of this episode, there are misconceptions in this case. And I think there's a lot of confusion, even though it is such a reported and covered case. And so that's why we're moving slowly, because we hope to lay it all before you so you have all of the facts as well as it can be known. And you can kind of follow this case through its trial and begin to make sense of what happened in that trial.
All right, guys. Well, this has been fun. We'll do it again next week. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Do you ever read our comments on the YouTube channel?
Do I read them? Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah. Did you see the one? It's just funny to me how some of them are just so completely wrong.
Oh, yeah.
There was one who was talking about Maura Murray, and they were chastising us because it was only in the 30s, so she wouldn't die of exposure that night, and she had a bottle of alcohol to keep her warm. And I'm like, dude, that's not how it works. I hope you're never in a survival situation. Monday. You know, there's no real order to this. Like, hopefully it's okay. I was just looking at like the outline, and it's not. There's not really. I don't know. I don't know if I have ordered this in the best way.
All this month, stream the funniest films for free on Pluto TV. Watch comedy classics like Anchorman, The Legend of Ron Burgundy, and Mean Girls. Or drop in for a Tyler Perry marathon with a Medea family funeral and Medea's witness protection. Pluto TV also has hundreds of channels and thousands of movies and TV shows like Get Shorty, Be Cool, Key and Peele, Comedy in Color, and more. And no contracts, no subscriptions, no fees, no joke. So download the Pluto TV app on your favorite streaming device and start laughing today. Pluto TV, drop in, watch free.